What would you do if someone you thought was weak suddenly had the power to change your life? Could a single careless action come back to haunt you in ways you never imagined? In a crowded diner, a cocky young man laughed as he dumped a milkshake over an older stranger, convinced everyone would join in his amusement. The old man didn't shout, didn't react. He only wiped his sleeve calmly and tapped twice on his watch, his steady gaze meeting the bullies with quiet authority. What could he possibly be signaling? Why wasn't he angry or scared? The air in the diner grew tense, whispers spreading as people noticed the subtle shift, the way the older man's presence seemed to command the room. Outside, engines hummed, shadows moved, hinting that this confrontation was far from ordinary. The bully's confidence began to crumble, a cold realization settling in as he wondered if he had misjudged the man completely. Sometimes, the people you underestimate quietly hold the power to change everything, and only reveal it when it's too late. And in that silent, charged moment, everyone watching felt the weight of what true strength really looks like. It was late afternoon in a small-town diner that smelled of coffee, grease, and rain-soaked pavement. The windows fogged from the warmth inside, blurring the neon open sign that flickered weakly against the darkening sky. Outside, puddles reflected the glow of passing headlights, each car slicing through the mist before disappearing into the distance. Inside, the world felt still, almost too still. The kind of stillness that comes before something breaks. The clatter of silverware and the soft murmur of conversations filled the room, blending with the faint hum of a jukebox that hadn't been updated in years. Waitresses moved with quiet rhythm, their smiles polite but tired, carrying plates stacked with fries and steaming mugs of coffee. The regulars sat in their usual booths, factory workers, truckers, and the retired few who came for company more than food. And then there was him, the old man sitting alone by the window, his back straight, eyes thoughtful, hands steady as he stirred his coffee. He wore a faded jacket, military style, with a patch almost hidden by time. The kind of man who didn't need attention to command it. There was something unspoken about him, an invisible gravity that made people lower their voices when they passed. Across the room, a group of younger men laughed too loudly, their arrogance spilling into the air like cheap perfume. They were loud, restless, feeding on each other's energy. The leader of the pack, the bully, was all swagger and grin, with eyes that scanned the room for easy targets. When his gaze landed on the old man, something shifted, a spark of mockery, the thrill of humiliating someone who wouldn't fight back. But before it happened, the diner gave subtle warnings. A sudden flicker in the lights, a shift in the tone of the jukebox, the waitress's uneasy glance as she set down a plate near the window. Even the air conditioner seemed to hum lower, as if the whole place sensed what was about to unfold. When the laughter finally broke the calm, it sounded too sharp, too deliberate. The milkshake hit the table, the counter, and finally the old man's jacket, dripping onto the floor. The laughter stopped almost as quickly as it began. The man didn't move, didn't even blink. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have. Somewhere outside, the faint sound of engines rolled closer, unseen but felt. The entire diner seemed to hold its breath, caught between ordinary life and the moment it was about to change forever. The doorbell chimed softly when he entered, though few noticed at first. The old man's steps were measured, his posture straight but not rigid, like someone who had learned long ago that strength doesn't need to be announced. He moved with quiet precision, the kind that came from years of discipline. His jacket, weathered and creased, carried the faint outline of a navy patch half faded from time. His hair was silver gray, cropped neatly, and his eyes, sharp yet calm, seemed to read every corner of the room before settling in the booth near the window. He didn't demand respect, but somehow, the silence around him gave it freely. He spoke few words, only to thank the waitress who refilled his coffee. His voice was low, steady, polite, but there was something in it, an undertone of authority that made people instinctively listen. He didn't look like a man searching for conflict, but rather someone who had faced enough of it to never seek it again. When he stirred his drink, his hand didn't shake. It moved with precision, as if every motion still followed the rhythm of command. Then came Evan, the kind of young man who thrived on noise. His presence filled the space before his words did, Loud laughter, careless swagger, confidence built on the attention of those around him. His friends followed his lead, hanging on every joke, every smirk. To them, he was the alpha of their small world. Dressed in designer sneakers and a leather jacket, Evan looked the part of someone untouchable. But beneath the surface, his arrogance came from fear of being unseen, of being ordinary. When Evan noticed the old man sitting alone, something inside him shifted. The old man's quiet confidence irritated him. It was the kind of calm he could never imitate. So he decided to test it. A show, nothing more. A cruel joke to make his friends laugh. He called the waitress over, ordered a milkshake, and exchanged a grin with his crew. The plan wasn't new. Humiliation was his favorite game. The waitress, Clara, sensed it before it happened. She'd been serving here for years, long enough to read trouble the way sailors read storms. She glanced at the old man, saw the faint scars on his hands, the steady posture, and something told her he wasn't who he seemed. She opened her mouth to speak but stopped when Evan stood, milkshake in hand. The moment stretched thin. The old man's eyes lifted, meeting Evan's with quiet patience. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper, an awareness, a silent calculation. The kind that came from a life spent assessing threats before they struck. And in that instant, before the first drop of milkshake fell, the diner wasn't just a diner anymore, it was a stage. Two worlds, two versions of power, about to collide in absolute silence. The diner clock ticked quietly above the counter, its second hand slicing through the stillness. Outside, rain began to whisper against the window panes, a slow rhythm that matched the pulse of the moment building inside. Evan's laughter broke the calm like glass shattering on tile. "What's the matter, Grandpa?" he sneered, holding the thick milkshake aloft, cold condensation dripping down his wrist. His friends leaned in closer, phones half ready, smirks curling at the edges of their faces. The waitress, Clara, froze mid-step, her instincts prickling. She had seen mean jokes before, but there was something crueler in this one, something deliberate. The old man didn't move. His spoon rested gently on the table beside his empty coffee cup. He looked up at Evan with those calm, unwavering eyes, the kind of look that makes a loud man feel suddenly very small. "You don't have to do that, son," he said quietly, his voice carrying more weight than any shout could. Evan chuckled, masking a flicker of unease. "Relax, old man. It's just a joke." His tone was light, but his grip tightened on the cup. The milkshake quivered. The old man tilted his head, studying him, not in judgment, but in understanding. "Jokes should leave people laughing," he said, his words slow and steady. "Not humiliated." The laughter around the table faltered. Something about the way he spoke, the control in his tone, felt different. But ego is a dangerous master, and Evan had already gone too far to back down. "You think you can teach me manners?" he snapped. "You're in my world, old man." And with that, he appended the cup. The thick, cold liquid splattered across the old man's shirt, dripping down his collar and pooling on the table. Gasps cut through the diner. For a heartbeat, there was only silence, the kind that comes right before thunder. The old man didn't react with anger. Instead, he exhaled slowly, his expression unchanged. He took a napkin, wiped his hands, and said softly, "You shouldn't have done that." Something in his tone made Evan's chest tighten. It wasn't a threat, it was a statement. Simple. Final. Then, without drawing attention, the old man twisted his wrist slightly under the table, pressing two fingers against his watch face. The subtle motion went unnoticed by everyone but Clara, who caught the gleam of a small blue light before it vanished. Evan laughed again, trying to shake the unease crawling up his spine. "What, you gonna call your bingo club?" he taunted. But the laughter sounded forced now. Minutes passed. The diner door opened with a chime. Two men in dark suits entered, their eyes sharp, their movements disciplined. They scanned the room once, then walked directly toward the old man. Evan turned pale as the taller one leaned down and said, "Sir, we received your signal." The old man stood slowly, adjusting his damp collar. "Thank you, Gentlemen, he said quietly. Then his gaze shifted back to Evan. You never know who you're dealing with, son. Respect costs you nothing, but losing it can cost you everything. Evan's bravado shattered. His hands trembled, his voice caught in his throat. And as the two agents exchanged a knowing glance, realization struck him like a wave. The harmless old man wasn't just anyone. He was a retired FBI agent, and this entire scene had just turned into a lesson he would never forget. In that diner full of witnesses, Evan bowed his head, not from command, but from the sudden, crushing weight of shame. The diner had gone dead silent. Not the silence of calm, but the charged, humming quiet that follows after a storm decides where it will strike next. Every pair of eyes was locked on that small corner booth where a milkshake had become a weapon, and respect had just been redefined. The two men in dark suits stood behind the old man now. Their posture wasn't aggressive, just aware. The kind of awareness that comes from years of training. The kind where every sound, every breath, every gesture means something. Evan swallowed hard, the weight of their gaze pressing into him. The arrogance that had danced on his face minutes ago was gone. What replaced it wasn't exactly fear, it was recognition. A dawning realization that he had just crossed a line drawn by someone who understood lines better than anyone. The old man took his time standing. Every motion was precise. He straightened his jacket, brushed off what remained of the milkshake, and looked at Evan, not with hate, but with something worse, disappointment. Do you know what separates power from control, son? His voice was quiet, but it carried through the room like a ripple through still water. Evan said nothing. His throat was dry. Power, the old man continued, is what you use to make others feel small. Control is what you keep when others try to do the same to you. The words hung there, heavy, irrefutable. Evan wanted to look away, but he couldn't. It was like standing under a spotlight that exposed more than he wanted to see. His own friends had stopped recording. One by one, their phones lowered, shame creeping in where laughter once lived. The old man's tone stayed measured, never angry, never proud. You thought this was about age, he said. About weakness. But respect doesn't fade with wrinkles, and strength doesn't need an audience. One of the suited men stepped forward slightly, a silent show of authority, but the old man raised a hand, signaling him to stand down. No, he said softly. He needs to learn this himself. Evan's lips trembled. I didn't know who you were. A faint, knowing smile crossed the old man's face. You shouldn't have to. That line cut deeper than any lecture could. It wasn't about who the old man was. It was about who Evan had chosen to be in that moment. The power in the room shifted quietly. No shouting. No punishment. Just the slow dismantling of ego. The old man gestured toward the booth across from him. Sit. Evan hesitated but obeyed. His knees felt weak as he lowered himself into the seat. The same seat where he had mocked the man just minutes ago. You know, the old man said, his tone conversational now, in the field, we used to run exercises. Scenarios where we'd test our judgment, see how quickly we could read a person. But the hardest test wasn't spotting danger. It was spotting our own arrogance before it destroyed something innocent. Evan's head lowered. I wasn't trying to. Yes, you were. The old man's interruption was soft, but final. Because you could. Because no one ever taught you the cost of casual cruelty. Outside, thunder rumbled, a long, low echo through the rain. It felt like the world itself was listening. The old man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small napkin, wiping his hands one last time. Then, almost as an afterthought, he said, You're lucky, son. You got to learn this lesson in a diner. Most men I knew learned it on a battlefield, or not at all. Evan's chest tightened. His eyes flicked toward the two agents, still standing like shadows, silent but unignorable. So, what now? He asked, his voice cracking. Now. The old man gave a half-smile. Now, you decide who you want to be the next time no one's watching. He turned to leave, but then paused, his hand resting on the table. And one more thing, he added, without turning back. Next time you see an old man sitting alone, maybe offer him respect before you offer him a reason to remember you. He walked toward the exit, his shoes making slow, deliberate sounds against the tile. The agents followed him, but not before one of them glanced back at Evan. A look that said everything words couldn't. When the door finally closed behind them, the air shifted again. The tension broke, leaving a hollow quiet that felt both heavy and cleansing. Evan stared down at the half-empty glass on the table. His reflection swam in the melted milkshake, blurred, distorted. He didn't like what he saw. For the first time, he realized that the man he'd been mocking wasn't his opposite. He was his mirror, one that showed him the kind of strength he'd never understood until it stared him down. Outside, the rain began to ease. The diner lights softened. And for a fleeting second, as Evan watched the taillights disappear into the mist, he whispered something no one heard. "I'm sorry." No one replied. But sometimes silence isn't punishment. It's permission to begin again. For a long moment after the old man left, the diner felt suspended in silence. The hum of the air conditioner returned, the clink of dishes resumed, but everything seemed quieter, like the world was exhaling after holding its breath too long. Evan sat motionless, his hands clasped together on the table, head bowed low. The milkshake stain on the floor had already begun to fade into the tile, but the memory of what he'd done lingered like a bruise he couldn't wash away. Around him, the same people who had once laughed now avoided his gaze. Not out of anger, but out of something far more painful, disappointment. That was when it hit him, not the shame, but the clarity. The old man hadn't humiliated him. He'd taught him. Without raising his voice, without lifting a hand, he had dismantled Evan's arrogance piece by piece and replaced it with truth. Respect isn't demanded. It's reflected. Evan's breathing steadied. He remembered the calm in the man's voice, the steadiness of his hands, the look in his eyes that spoke of wars far beyond anything Evan could imagine. The old man had never needed to prove who he was. Power didn't need validation. For the first time in his life, Evan realized how small noise could be, and how loud silence truly was. He stood up slowly, picked up a napkin, and began wiping the table clean. The waitress who had earlier looked away now met his eyes. He nodded, not seeking forgiveness, but showing it. When he walked outside, the storm had cleared. The air was crisp, the pavement glistening under the pale streetlight. In the distance, the sound of an engine faded into the night, steady, unhurried. Evan stood there for a while, staring after it, then whispered to himself, "Next time, I'll be better." It wasn't an apology. It was a promise. That was the turning point, not when the bully was defeated, but when the man who mocked learned what strength really looked like. Morning light spilled through the diner's windows, soft and golden, washing away the storm that had raged the night before. The chairs were stacked, the floors mopped clean, and the memory of last night lingered in the air like a ghost no one dared to name. Evan returned, not to explain, not to justify, but simply to face what he'd left behind. He stepped inside quietly, the bell above the door giving a faint chime that felt heavier than it should. The waitress glanced up, her expression unreadable. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she nodded toward the booth by the window, the one where it had all happened. He walked over and sat down, staring at the faint ring of a coffee cup left behind. The seat across from him was empty now, but he could almost see the old man sitting there again. Calm, unbothered, his presence still commanding even in absence. Evan exhaled slowly. He'd spent the night replaying every second of that encounter, every word, every glance. It wasn't the embarrassment that haunted him, it was the understanding. The realization that strength wasn't about how loud he could be, but how much he could endure without losing his dignity. His phone buzzed. A message from one of his friends who had recorded the incident. "We deleted the video. None of us could watch it again." Evan typed a single reply, "Good." Then he powered off his phone and set it aside. A man in a sheriff's uniform entered the diner, scanning the room. When he saw Evan, he approached slowly. "You're Evan, right?" he asked, his tone professional but not unkind. Evan nodded. "The man you Encountered last night, filed no report, the sheriff said. No charges, no complaint. Just left a note for you. The sheriff handed him a folded piece of paper. Evan's hands shook slightly as he opened it. The handwriting was firm, deliberate. Discipline is learned when consequences are silent. Choose better, and one day, someone weaker will thank you for it. No signature. Just a single initial, R. Evan folded the note carefully and tucked it into his wallet, next to an old photograph of his family. He didn't need to know the man's full name anymore. What mattered was what he had left behind, a lesson disguised as mercy. Outside, the sky was clear again. Evan stepped into the sunlight, feeling its warmth settle on his face. For the first time, he didn't feel the need to perform, to posture, to prove. The weight of guilt was still there, but it had turned into something useful, accountability. He looked back at the diner one last time. Through the glass, the waitress caught his eye and gave him a small nod of approval. It wasn't forgiveness, it was acknowledgement. As he walked toward his car, he noticed a group of younger teens laughing by the curb, one of them teasing another. He stopped, watched for a moment, and then crossed the street. "Hey," he said softly, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Don't. It's not worth it." The laughter faded. They looked at him, confused. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. Sometimes, the greatest justice isn't seen in punishment. It's seen in who you become after you're forgiven. Power fades. Titles vanish. But character leaves a mark long after the noise has died. That night in the diner wasn't about humiliation. It was about revelation. The moment a man saw himself for the first time without the mask of pride. The retired FBI agent never needed to win an argument. He only needed to hold a mirror to the truth. In silence, he gave a lesson louder than any punishment could deliver. Evan walked away changed, not because he was defeated, but because he was seen. True strength, he realized, isn't in how hard you hit. It's in how gently you hold power once you have it. And perhaps that's the real measure of a man. Not in the noise he makes, but in the peace he leaves behind. Final line, quote, "Respect isn't earned through fear or force, it's remembered through grace."